Are the billionaires okay? From Elon Musk turning Twitter into a racist cesspool in his attempt to make everyone like him, to Peter Thiel trying to make Bioshock's Rapture into a real place. The rich have shown time and time again that money is an express train to the most regressive beliefs imaginable. Which, when you learn about why people join these causes, well, it becomes a bit weird. There is a video that documents the process by which people join the far right, called How the Alt-Right is Like an Abusive Relationship, by Innuendo Studios. In it, the narrative points out that the main reason people fall down the alt-right pipeline is due to a phenomenon called aggrieved entitlement. I could tell you what that is, but I think he gave a better explanation than I ever could, so I'll let him speak for me.
Kimmel's argument is that extremism begins with a pain peculiar to young men. He calls it aggrieved entitlement. I call it Durden syndrome. You know that scene in Fight Club where Tyler says we've all been raised by television to believe that one day we'd all be millionaires and movie gods and rock stars, but we won't, and we're slowly learning that fact, and we are very, very pissed off. Yeah, that. As men, the world promised us something, and the promise wasn't kept. Now, some men skew towards social progressivism when they realize that this promise was never made to women or men of color or queer or trans or non-binary people and recognize the injustice of that. And some men skew towards economic leftism when they realize that every cis-het white man being a millionaire rock star movie god is mathematically impossible. But they skew towards reactionary conservatism when they feel the promise should have been kept. That's the life they were supposed to have, and someone took it from them. Hate groups appeal to that sense of emasculation. You want to be a real man? Shave off your hair, dance to hatecore, and let's beat the crap out of someone. Kimmel notes that the greatest indicator someone will join a hate group is a broken home, divorce, foster care, parents with addictions, physical or sexual abuse. The greater the distance between the life they were promised and the one they are living, the more enticing real masculinity becomes. Their fellow extremists are brothers and the leaders father figures. The group does give them someone to blame for their lot in life, be it immigrants, feminists, or the Jewish conspiracy, but that's not why they join. They're after empowerment. According to Kimmel, their embrace of neo-Nazi ideology is a consequence of their recruitment and indoctrination process, not its cause.
If you want to learn more about this subject, I highly recommend you watch the video yourself. If most of them join due to aggrieved entitlement, then why are 1%ers joining the Munich Putsch so enthusiastically? They've won the game of life. What do they think they'll get? I've been asking myself that question for a long time, and for a while I didn't have answers. That was until I saw American Psycho, and I realized that the rich have a lot more in common with the average alt-righter than you'd think. For those who don't know, American Psycho is about a yuppie by the name of Patrick Bateman. He is in most ways pretty similar to his colleagues. He goes to the same restaurants as them, talks the same as them, hell, he even looks the same as them. But there is one exception that sets him apart from his peers. Because, unbeknownst to his friends, Patrick Bateman is a serial killer. The film is a satire of the life of conspicuous consumption that the rich lead. And because of that, it brings us a lot of insight into what makes the wealthy tick. Before we start this section, I'd like to say that I got a lot of the insights I'm using here from Renegade Cut's video on the film. I couldn't have done it without him, so I thought it was only right to give him credit. Now, on to the analysis. Now, I want to say that there is a lot to Patrick as a character, but for our purposes, we will be looking mainly at two of his traits. Those being a need for dominance and a worship of conformity. First, let's start with conformity. Throughout the film, Patrick and his peers are always chasing some sort of trend. They're always eating at some fancy restaurant or wearing the newest fashion. Patrick himself is always listening to the newest music, but it's never really out of enjoyment. When he's shown listening to his Walkman early in the film, he doesn't appear to enjoy the experience. He seems more bored than anything. However, when he talks to his friends about the music he's heard, he describes the songs like they're transcendent works of art. To him, the point of listening to music isn't to have fun, but instead to show off how hip he is. Hell, later in the film, he states that he started enjoying the band Genesis more when it became more commercial. His enjoyment of art is dependent on how popular it is. In his mind, bands become better as they become more mainstream. His pursuit of luxury doesn't really appear to be about personal pleasure. When Patrick purchases the services of a couple of escorts, he gets them to make how do I say this on YouTube? A prawn film. While he's recording the film, he doesn't focus on the escorts. Instead, he looks at his reflection and flexes his muscles. Patrick seems less interested in pursuing happiness than he is in trying to become the man he believes he's supposed to be. This attempt to reach that image of a man causes him to become indistinguishable from his peers. Throughout the film, Patrick is the victim of mistaken identity. Whether he's going out dining with friends, when he shows them his business card, hell, even when he confesses his murders to his lawyer, by name, at the end of the film, Patrick ends up being misidentified. He is such a conformist that he's invisible. You couldn't notice if he was right in front of you because he has obliterated his individual identity in his pursuit of conformity. By now you might be asking, how is the need for conformity relevant? And I'm glad you asked that. You see, in the 1980s, a psychologist by the name of Bob Altemeyer started researching far-right sentiment. He created a scale to measure these sentiments, and used it to perform various experiments. In one of these, he revealed to his participants how they scored on the scale. When those who scored low were informed of their rank, they said they were where they wanted to be. Those with average scores said they wanted to be low. However, high scores wanted average scores. Amongst those on the far right, one of the most common overriding desires is to be normal. When high scorers were told what the average belief was, they tended to shift their beliefs closer to that of the norm. Though, quick tangent here, there were limitations to this. Altemeyer has noted that they would never waver in their views on abortion, no matter how unpopular their views were shown to be. They're also intelligent enough to know that being smarter or richer than average is better than being normal. Nonetheless, it goes to show just how important conformity is for people who join the far right, and this info will be pivotal to understanding a lot of stuff going forward. If you want to learn more about this subject, I recommend you read Altemeyer's book, The Authoritarians. You can download it for free at theauthoritarians.org. It does a great job at shining a light on this topic. Now that we finished talking about conformity, let's move on to dominance. One of the main reasons the film's yuppies are shown trying to get all these highly expensive luxury goods is because it's a good way to assert that they are of a higher status than their peers. It's not really a secret that a big reason Ferraris, Rolexes, and Gucci exist is to essentially show off how rich you are, and we can see this in the famous business card scene. For those who haven't seen the film, the scene begins with Patrick trying to impress his friends by showing off his business card. Then, they end up one-upping Bateman by showing off their slightly different business cards. Now, to a normal person, this wouldn't be a big deal. When you can tell their cards apart, they are barely distinguishable. But to Patrick, it's life or death. The fact these cards are slightly better than his makes him feel like his life is over. In fact, he's so enraged by this that he decides to kill his coworker Paul Allen to get revenge for showing him up. He doesn't react by thinking, my business card is worth a lot, even if my friends have slightly better ones. He instead ends up feeling worthless, because he can no longer claim to be the best. We can also see his need for dominance in who Patrick decides to target. Most of the folk Bateman chooses to kill are less powerful members of society, like the hobo or the escort. By going after those he perceives as lesser, he can reassert himself as top dog. The only real exception to this is Paul Allen, and even then, it's pretty obviously to get back at Allen for upstaging him. The yuppies base their appraisals of others based on how in tune with trends you are, which brings up an interesting question. If your respect for someone is largely for their adherence to trends, what will you think of those who are unable or unwilling to follow these trends, such as the poor? Well, let's take a look at the evidence. According to the UNESCO Institute of Statistics, bullying victims in wealthy countries come mostly from lower-class backgrounds. We can see why this is in this article from The Conversation. The piece suggests that bullying is more likely to occur in places rife with financial inequality, because those environments demand you get ahead by any means necessary. It also asserts that it is possible that this link might be in part because poorer children don't have enough money to buy status symbols. Hell, there are stories of children being bullied for not having premium skins in the games they play. People literally make judgments on your skill as a player based on whether or not you have these skins. The term default has been created to deride such players. There is a lot of evidence that people are more likely to bully you if you don't conform to these trends, which means that if you're lower on the ladder of wealth, you might get more judgment rendered upon you. In addition, the trends that Patrick and his friends follow tend to be tailored to people who have money, and certain groups are a little richer than others. Some people will say that's because they make bad choices. And even if we assume that's true, brands will still give less to them because they have less money. What's relevant is that they have less, not why. Since these trends tend to be tailored to the tastes of cis-het white men, that means that the tastes of women or black people will not be trendy in the same way. If you think that the tastes that brands cater to are worth more, you're gonna think less of the ones that aren't catered to. The very act of existing as part of a group outside of that box becomes a deviancy from those trends. Enjoying things tailored to those groups transforms into an example of deviancy. And to a conformist, there is nothing worse than a deviant. The film also shows a notable problem with the trend seeker's mentality. You see, the point of keeping up with the Joneses is to show off the new thing, to show off something your friends don't have. You might think that as you get richer, it would get easier to show off, because you can buy everything. But you'd be wrong. There's this great video by the channel Some More News called Are Rich People Okay? It goes into how possessing extreme wealth just royally fucks up your mind. And one of the points brought up in the video is that the wealthy hang out largely with other rich people. Since keeping up with the Joneses is about keeping up with your peers, this means that rich people will be looking for stuff that's hard for them to obtain. The film gives us an example of this through Dorsia. For those who haven't seen the film, Dorsia is a restaurant where Patrick and his friends are trying to find a reservation. Everyone wants to get one, but actually obtaining one seems to be an impossibility. There's a point early in the film where Patrick's trying to book a table there over the phone. When he asks the restaurant if there's one available, he isn't just refused, he's laughed at. He is literally taunted by the restaurant's exclusion of him. Later in the film, Patrick gets to go through this a second time, when his assistant, Jean, responds to his offer of dinner at any place he wants by asking if they can go to Dorsia. This angers Patrick so much that he ends up inviting her to his apartment with the intent to murder her. During this scene, Patrick mentions he's on a diet, and when Jean points out that Patrick is already thin, he responds by saying this:
You can always be thinner. Look better.
No matter what Patrick has, it's never enough. He always needs to perform better. He's always doing too little. His view that he has to keep up with the latest trends tells him that he's never good enough, that he's always fallen ever so slightly behind, and that he needs to make up for it however he can. You might want to know where I'm going with this. Well, I'm happy to get to the point. You see, the aforementioned video from Some More News brought up how rich people spending recklessly to keep up with the Joneses often leaves them with the sensation that they are struggling to make ends meet.
It's not really that money buys happiness. It's that money removes stressors of survival that cause unhappiness. There is a point for everyone where the money to happy ratio levels out. It's of course hard to imagine because the people often pointing this out are, rich.
I thought that success was all I needed. That's what was going to bring the happiness. Buying my mom a house, when those things came, the happiness wasn't there.
Thank you, fellow rich person J. Cole. Achieving a high level of wealth or status does a couple of things to the human brain that cause less happiness. That social isolation we mentioned earlier doesn't just lead to a lack of compassion and empathy for others, but it also isolates them from their own community. Rich people overall spend less time socializing than lower income people, but when they do, they have to hang out with other rich people, which sounds honestly terrible. Like, imagine having to play code names with this guy. And just like you and your friends competing over who's better at video games or who can fit the most bottle caps in their mouth, this creates a feedback loop of rich people only comparing themselves to other rich people. It's why some of these depressing assholes have spent the last few decades competing to own the biggest yacht. Or, one imagines, trying to see who can fit the most golden bottle caps in their mouths. It's Warren Buffett, obviously. No better example is the recent article in The Cut about the Fleischman effect, named after the classic DC Comics character Fleischman. The Fleshman. It details the struggle of America's moderately affluent who don't feel quite rich enough. Quote, "Since leaving New York, Beth has found herself in tears at least once a week. She makes $300,000 a year, more than she's ever earned in her life, but she's running out of minutes in the day to squeeze out more dollars. How do I make the $700,000 that I'm going to need to send my daughter to private school or do the renovation in the attic so I can turn it into the master suite so I can have a tub and so I can have one thing I enjoy in my life?" she says. Not surprisingly, Beth isn't her real name. The people interviewed for that article seem to understand that complaining about their lives is like complaining about being given too much free weed at Coachella, or just being given too much free weed, period. But even all that free weed, or I guess an attic tub, won't make her any happier.
This seems to be somewhat common amongst the rich in general, but it's likely that rich folk will notice this in themselves and not their peers. This is because admitting that you're struggling to keep up with your peers is an admission that you are less capable of playing the game of keeping up with the Joneses. To rich people, it's basically an admission of inferiority. So, they'll end up keeping this shit under wraps to spare themselves the judgment of their peers. And because of that, every rich person will think that their friends are doing better than them. They'll feel that they are at the bottom of the pyramid, while their friends are living the high life, and that the best they can do is trick their friends into thinking they're on equal footing. They'll feel like there is a massive difference between the life they were promised and the life they were given. Or, to put it another way, they're living in a recipe for aggrieved entitlement. I used to be confused by the rich's love of fascism, but in retrospect, I'm surprised I didn't understand it sooner. If your lifestyle is already based around asserting dominance over others, why would subjugating people for the hell of it sound wrong to you? If you are so powerful that the boot is unlikely to ever be brought down upon your neck, why would you fear the fascist? I started off writing this script asking myself why they would join these causes. But in retrospect, I should have been asking myself why they wouldn't.